Techniques for dealing with behavior problems. If you follow the procedures just discussed, you should be able to establish a well-managed classroom. Even if you do everything possible to prevent problems from developing, however, you are still likely to have to deal with the relatively minor disruptions of an individual student or two. This section contains some practical suggestions for keeping individual students more task-oriented. More broad-based interventions that attempt to reduce the frequency of more serious problems, such as physical and verbal violence between students, and that involve entire classrooms or the entire school, are discussed in a later section. As you read about the techniques that are described in the next several pages, keep in mind that the key to any effective intervention is to focus on when and under what conditions disruptive behavior occurs and to discourage further occurrences. Focusing on whom to blame, it's the fault of the parents or rebellious peer group, or what label to apply, the student has oppositional defiant disorder, will not help you solve the problem. Influence techniques. In Mental Hygiene in Teaching, Fritz Redl and William Wattenberg describe a list of behavior management interventions called influence techniques. This list was modified by Thomas Shea and Ann Bauer in Behavior Management, a Practical Approach for Educators. In the following sections and subsections, based on the ideas of both sets of individuals, we will offer specific examples, roughly reflecting a least direct to most direct ordering. You might use the journal entries to pick out or devise techniques that seem most appropriate for your grade level or that you feel comfortable about. The value of these techniques is that they appeal to self-control and imply trust and confidence on the part of the teacher. However, they may become ineffective if they are used too often, and that is why we describe so many different techniques. The larger your repertoire is, the less frequently you will need to repeat your various gambits and ploys. Planned ignoring. As we pointed out in Chapter 7 on behavioral learning theory, you might be able to extinguish inappropriate attention-seeking behaviors by merely ignoring them. Such behaviors include finger snapping, body movements, book dropping, hand waving, and whistling. If you plan to use the planned ignoring technique, make sure the student is aware that he is engaging in the inappropriate behavior. This technique should not be used if the behavior in question is interfering with other students' efforts. Example, Carl has recently gotten into the habit of tapping his pencil on his desk as he works on an assignment in a way to engage you in a conversation that is unrelated to the work. The next several times Carl does this, do not look at him or comment on his behavior. Signals. In some cases, a subtle signal can put an end to budding misbehavior. The signal, if successful, will stimulate the student to control herself. Note, however, that this technique should not be used too often and that it is effective only in the early stages of misbehavior. Examples: clear your throat, stare at the offender, stop what you're saying in mid-sentence and stare, shake your head to indicate no, say someone is making it hard for the rest of us to concentrate, or the equivalent. Proximity and touch control. Place yourself close to the misbehaving student. This makes a signal a bit more apparent. Walk over and stand near the student. With an elementary grade student, it sometimes helps if you place a gentle hand on a shoulder or arm. Interest boosting. If the student seems to be losing interest in a lesson or assignment, pay some special attention to the student and the student's work. Ask the student a question, preferably related to what is being discussed. Questions such as, Ariel, are you paying attention? Or don't you agree, Ariel? Invite wisecracks. Genuine questions are preferable. Go over and examine some work the student is doing. It often helps if you point out something good about it and urge continued effort. Humor. Humor is an excellent all-around influence technique, especially in tense situations. However, remember that it should be good-humored humor, gentle and benign rather than derisive. Avoid irony and sarcasm. Sean, for goodness sakes, let that poor pencil sharpener alone. I heard it groan when you used it just now. Perhaps you have heard someone say, we're not laughing at you, we're laughing with you. Before you say this to one of your students, you might take note that one second grader who was treated to that comment unhinged the teacher by replying, I'm not laughing. Helping over hurdles. Some misbehavior undoubtedly occurs because students do not understand what they are to do or lack the ability to carry out an assignment. Try to make sure your students know what they're supposed to do. Arrange for students to have something to do at appropriate levels of difficulty. Have a variety of activities available. Program restructuring. At the beginning of this book, we noted that teaching is an art because lessons do not always proceed as planned and must be occasionally changed in midstream. The essence of this program restructuring technique is to recognize when a lesson or activity is going poorly and try something else. Well, class, I can see that many of you are bored with this discussion of the pros and cons of congressional term limits. Let's turn it into a class debate instead, with the winning team getting 50 points towards its final grade. I had hoped to complete this math unit before the Christmas break, but I can see that most of you are too excited to give it your best effort. Since today is the last day before the break, I'll postpone the lesson until school resumes in January. Let's do an art project instead. Antiseptic bouncing. Sometimes the student will get carried away by restlessness, uncontrolled giggling, or the like. If you feel that this is non-malicious behavior and due simply to a lack of self-control, ask the student to leave the room. You may have recognized that antiseptic bouncing is virtually identical to the timeout procedure described by behavior modification enthusiasts. Examples: Nancy, please go down to the principal's office and sit on that bench outside the door until you feel you have control of yourself. Some high school students have quiet rooms. Some high schools have quiet rooms, supervised study halls that take extra students anytime during a period, no questions asked. Physical restraint. Students who lose control of themselves to the point of endangering other members of the class may have to be physically restrained. Such restraint should be protective, not punitive. That is, don't shake or hit. This technique is most effective with younger children. Such control is usually not appropriate at the secondary level. If a boy completely loses his temper and starts to hit another child, lead him gently but firmly away from the other students, or sit him in a chair and keep a restraining hand on his shoulder. Direct appeals. When appropriate, point out the connection between conduct and its consequences. This technique is most effective if done concisely and infrequently. We have a rule that there is to be no running in the halls. Scott forgot the rule, and now he's down in the nurse's office having his bloody nose taken care of. It's too bad Mr. Harris opened his door just as Scott went by. If Scott had been walking, he would have been able to stop in time. If everyone would stop shouting, we'd be able to get this finished and go out to recess. Criticism and engagement. On those occasions when it is necessary to criticize a particular student, do so in private if possible. When public criticism is the only possibility, do your best to avoid ridiculing or humiliating the student. Public humiliation may cause the child to resent you, or to hate school, or to counterattack, or to withdraw. Because of the ripple effect, it may also have a negative impact on innocent students, although non-humiliating public criticism has the advantage of setting an example for other students. One way to minimize the negative after effects of criticism is to tack on some encouragement in the form of a suggestion as to how the backsliding can be replaced by more positive behavior. If a student doesn't take subtle hints, such as stares, you might say, "LeVar, you're disturbing the class. We all need to concentrate on this." It sometimes adds punch if you make this remark while you're writing on the board or helping some other student. Act completely flabbergasted, as though the misbehavior seems so inappropriate that you can't comprehend it. A kindergarten teacher used this technique to perfection. She would say, "Adam, is that you?" Adam has been belting Lucy with a shovel. "I can't believe my eyes. I wonder if you would help me over here." Obviously, this gambit can't be used too often, and the language and degree of exaggeration have to be altered a bit for older students. But indicating that you expect good behavior and providing an immediate opportunity for the backslider to substitute good deeds can be very effective. Defining limits. In learning about rules and regulations, children go through a process of testing the limits. 2-year-olds, particularly when they have learned how to walk and talk and manipulate things, feel the urge to assert their independence. In addition, they need to find out exactly what the house rules are. Does Mommy really mean it when she says don't take the pots out of the cupboard? Does Daddy really mean it when he says don't play with that hammer? Other children do the same thing, especially with new teachers and in new situations. The technique of defining limits includes not only establishing rules, as noted earlier, but also enforcing them. Establish class rules with or without the assistance of students and make sure the rules are understood. When someone tests the rules, show that they are genuine and that there are limits. Post-situational follow-up. Classroom discipline occasionally has to be applied in a tense, emotion-packed atmosphere. When this happens, it often helps to have a post-situational discussion in private if an individual is involved, with the whole class if it was a group-wide situation. In a private conference, Leela, I'm sorry I had to ask you to leave the room, but you were getting kind of carried away. Well, things got a little bit wild during those group work sessions. I want you to enjoy yourselves, but we practically had a riot going, didn't we? And that's what I have to ask you to stop. Let's try to hold it down to a dull roar tomorrow. Marginal use of interpretation. Analysis of behavior can sometimes be made while it is occurring rather than afterward. The purpose here is to help students become aware of potential trouble and make efforts to control it. To a restless and cranky pre-lunch class, you might say, I know that you're getting hungry and that you're restless and tired, but let's give it all we've got for 10 minutes more. I'll give you the last 5 minutes for some free visiting time. iMessages. In Teacher and Child, Haim Guinot offers the cardinal principle of communication. Talk to the situation, not to the personality and character. Instead of making derogatory remarks about the personalities of two boys who have just thrown bread at each other, Guinot suggests that as a teacher, you deliver an iMessage explaining how you feel. Don't say, you are a couple of pigs. Say, I get angry when I see bread thrown around. This room needs cleaning. According to Guinot, guilty students who are told why a teacher is angry will realize the teacher is a real person, and this realization will cause them to strive to mend their ways. Guinot offers several examples of this cardinal principle of communication in Chapter 4 of Teacher and Child, and in Chapter 6 he offers some observations on discipline. Seek alternatives to punishment. Try not to diminish a misbehaving student's self-esteem. Try to provide face-saving exits. Despite the fact that Guinot's work is over 30 years old, its usefulness is demonstrated by the fact that his ideas appear regularly in recent books and articles on classroom management. Mrs. Poirier, I don't want to winter vacation. I want to stay in school. These words were spoken to me by one of my first grade students. I will call him John, who is extremely busy, very smart, and constantly helpful. In the past, I've struggled with students like this child because he wants to do his own thing when he wants to do it. I believe that because I have implemented an effective behavior management plan, this child and the rest of my class is thriving. It all starts with truly loving your profession and the children with whom you are lucky enough to share the day. When classroom management is at its best, optimal teaching and learning is possible. In my opinion, and based on my teaching experience, effective classroom management should center around these four tenets: genuine relationships, routine and structure, consistent consequences, positive reinforcements. Genuine relationships. Good morning, how are you today? Two simple sentences, yet we should never overlook those greetings and questions when it comes to the powerful practice of effective classroom management. You should be at your students' disposal first thing in the morning with a smile and a greeting. Crouching down to their level, looking them in the eye, and inquiring about their welfare transcends with children. Whether they are 6 or 16, children can recognize how genuine you are. It all starts with truly loving your profession and the children with whom you are lucky enough to share the day. It's unclear to me if John is nurtured in a way before he arrives at school, in any way. That's why it's my job to make sure he knows that that's the way it should be. Everyone deserves a smile, a greeting, and in first grade, of course, a hug. Your genuine interest in your student should continue throughout the day. Begin getting to know your children and their interests, hobbies, and passions from the first moment they walk through the room. Routine and structure. Classroom management strikes a balance between rules and routines and nurturing and support. These need to be symbiotic. It starts with knowing the expectation. When kids know what to expect, whether it's about their own safety, their own learning, or the consequences, they can feel comfortable with what's coming next. When kids don't know what's coming next, it creates a chaotic, unproductive environment. Consistent consequences. Rules and consequences need to be clearly established right from the beginning. If you are studying to become a teacher, it is highly beneficial to spend a few days in the classroom in the beginning of the year. This will give you a snapshot that no textbook can give you. One student who has Asperger's syndrome was so disruptive, and looking back on that now, I know there are patterns of consistency that I missed. Now I talk less. I do not allow disruptions to get in the way of my emotions. Positive reinforcement. Also, you want to create an environment where kids know the expectations, and you want to create an environment where kids get a haircut, and you notice, or if you ask if the tooth fairy delivered this morning, or you ask if their baby brother or sister is feeling better. This is how you show your investment in your children. After all, they are why you are a teacher. Kids know when you are genuine and when you are putting on a show. They also want to hear about your life. They want to know the funny stories about your puppy or how your child took his first steps. This is how you connect with your students. I have a student who is constantly asking, what's next? What are we doing? Can I help? What can I do? And it's constant. I've embraced this into thinking about every which way I can help, and how he can help. And I let him, and he has created streamlined ways of passing out handwriting books or materials, and it works for him, and it works for me. Let loose.